We are looking into the materials on an individual whose image is, well, it's permanently etched into the cultural memory of the 1980s.
Dana Plato.
Dana Plato. For so many, she really does remain that quintessential wholesome teen idol, best known for her role as Kimberly Drummond on the massive sitcom Diff'rent Strokes.
And yet, the materials we've pulled together, which, detail her life, they show a really stark and frankly startling contrast to that image.
Right.
We've synthesized a comprehensive narrative here, and it covers her professional ascent, but it also gets into the deep, very complex personal struggle that followed. Our mission here is to trace that chronology, to understand the realities faced by child stars, and more specifically, the severe systemic challenges that Dana Plato encountered.
And this exploration is necessary because the facts presented they're difficult. They cover early fame, substance abuse, legal issues, financial catastrophe, and ultimately a tragic and very early death in 1999. So given the sensitivity of all this, we have to maintain a tone of respect and careful attention to the documented record. This isn't a simple story. It's a sequence of events layered with vulnerability and consequence.
It truly is. The essential summary starts with Dana Michelle Strain, born in 1964. She was adopted, and then she quickly became a household name as Kimberly Drummond between 1978 and 1986. I mean, she really established herself as a cornerstone of teen celebrity culture.
A huge star.
A huge star. And what's so striking in these source materials is just the speed of her life's trajectory reversal. She went from being an Olympic aspirant figure skater and a prolific commercial star. I mean, having appeared in over 100 commercials by the time she was 7 to a life tragically consumed by addiction, profound financial hardship, and repeated run-ins with the law. She died at only 34 years old.
That transition. That is the central tension we'll be exploring. For you, the listener, this narrative provides a crucial lens to examine celebrity culture, especially when it comes to child performers. We are looking at a case study in how dramatically public perception and the underlying private reality can diverge.
And often with devastating consequences. It's a powerful exploration of how quickly public life can consume private stability.
Okay, so let's unpack this by starting right at the very beginning, the foundation of her life and her initial rise to stardom.
Dana was born Linda Strain, that was in November of 1964, in Huntington Park, California. Her birth mother was a teenager who already had one child. She was adopted at 7 months old in June 1965. By Dean Plato, who owned a trucking company, and his wife, Florine, who is generally known as Kay.
And she was raised in the San Fernando Valley, so a very comfortable, aspirational environment.
Exactly.
But that family structure, it didn't last long, which is a key detail the materials highlight.
It is. When Dana was just 3 years old, her adoptive parents divorced, and she went to live primarily with her mother, Florine.
And this single-parent environment, with a high-achieving child actor, this seems to be where that intense, highly structured, and maybe isolating early life really began.
It absolutely set the stage. And that environment is something Dana reflected on later in her life, long after her fame had peaked. In 1995, during an appearance on a psychological talk show, The Marilyn Kagan Show, she spoke very candidly about her childhood.
And this is where that famous, really evocative quote comes from, describing her upbringing.
That's right. She shared that her mother attempted to ensure she was normal despite the demands of her career, but then she dropped the line that has become synonymous with her early life. Her mother kept her in a plastic bubble.
That phrase, plastic bubble, it just speaks volumes about emotional isolation and a lack of preparation for the real world. Did she elaborate on what that meant in practical terms?
She did. She explained that because of this isolation and protection, this bubble, she didn't learn about reality and life skills. And this is a critical insight because when we look later at her adult struggles, particularly with finance and personal boundaries, this foundational lack of real-world knowledge seems to be a major contributing factor.
That makes sense.
Interestingly, on that same show, the host, Marilyn Kagan, she questioned if Plato's mother had perhaps used her as a free meal ticket given the intense commercial career that started so young.
And how did Dana respond to that accusation?
Plato emphatically denied it. She defended her mother's intent, stating that Florine was explicitly trying to prevent Dana from becoming a prima donna.
So you have this conflict, this intense desire to protect the child from the negative aspects of celebrity, which ironically resulted in the child being utterly unprepared for the necessary life skills needed to navigate her own adult life.
Precisely. Her early life was successfully engineered for professional performance, but it seems it failed to foster personal resilience or any kind of financial literacy.
That engineering for performance was evident not just in her commercial work, but in her intense physical discipline as well, which actually predated her main acting roles.
Indeed. Before she became Kimberly Drummond, she was an exceptionally serious figure skater. The sources note she trained intensively with the goal of a potential spot on the U.S. Olympic team.
So that adds another crucial dimension to her childhood. The relentless pressure of intense athletic discipline on top of the demands of an intensive performing career, all before she was even a teenager.
And the commercial work alone was a full-time career. It's really staggering to realize that by the age of 7, she had already appeared in over 100 television commercials. That volume of professional exposure, the need to perform on cue, the constant travel and auditions, it's an enormous commitment for a very small child.
This constant professional activity, it quickly led to bigger roles.
It did. Her official television debut came at age 10 with an appearance on The $6 Million Man in 1975, and she also starred that same year in a made-for-television movie called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle.
And her first feature film roles followed shortly after that. She had a small uncredited role as Sandra Fayler in the famous, or maybe infamous, horror sequel, Exorcist II, The Heretic in 1977.
Right, and she also starred as Evie Jo in the independent feature Return to Boggy Creek that same year.
It's interesting to note the critical environment she was navigating even at that young age. Both of those films were not well received.
No, they were critically panned. So almost immediately, her career was characterized by this tension between high-profile but poorly received genre projects.
That tension was relieved almost instantly, though, with a role that demonstrated her genuine acting ability. She played Jenny Warren in the 1978 family comedy California Suite.
And that film was a major success. It was commercially viable and critically acclaimed, earning accolades at both the Academy Awards and the Golden Globe Awards. So by the age of 14, she was demonstrating range and working with high-caliber talent, which made her selection for her defining role seem even more logical.
And that defining role, of course, was Diff'rent Strokes. How did she make that jump from acclaimed film work to a sitcom?
It was almost pure chance, the kind of story that Hollywood loves to tell. She made a brief appearance on the rather chaotic game show, The Gong Show, and one of the producers spotted her there and called her in.
Just like that.
Just like that. That serendipitous appearance led directly to her casting as Kimberly Drummond.
The role was the older sister to adopted brothers Arnold and Willis Jackson, played by Gary Coleman and Todd Bridges. The show debuted in 1978 and was, well, it was an instant cultural phenomenon. It was one of NBC's biggest hits of the era.
And its central concept, this wealthy white family adopts 2 black boys from Harlem. It spoke volumes about the cultural aspirations and tensions of the time.
For her, the show's success created genuine teen superstardom. She was a central figure, recognized everywhere. For the first 4 years of the show's run, she was top billed. The show really defined the term wholesome family comedy for a whole generation.
She received tangible recognition for her performance, too, including a Young Artist Award nomination for her work on the show itself, and she shared in 2 TV Land Award nominations with the ensemble cast. Her public profile couldn't have been higher in those years.
No, and the sources confirmed that this high profile extended beyond the sitcom set.
Yeah.
She co-starred with her Diff'rent Strokes co-star, Todd Bridges, in the 1983 TV film High School USA, playing a character named Kara Ames.
Right, and she had other major appearances like the 1981 television special A Step in Time, which earned her a second Young Artist Award nomination. She was living the life that millions of young people dreamed of, a successful teen idol with a booming career.
But this intense peak, it also set her up for a precipitous fall.
That's the pivot point. The pressure cooker of fame, the lack of a private life, and the inherent conflicts of navigating adolescence under the public eye. It all brought her into conflict with the very image that made her famous.
And this brings us to the downward trajectory of her career and the beginning of her personal collapse.
The first major, very public crack in that plastic bubble happened in 1984. She was suddenly dismissed from her starring role on Diff'rent Strokes.
And the trigger was the most personal of events.
Yeah.
She became pregnant.
Yes, and subsequently gave birth to her son, Tyler.
The rationale the producers used is incredibly telling about the industry standards at the time.
It is. They stated that her pregnancy and the personal issues that were starting to surface were deemed to negatively impact the show's meticulously curated, wholesome family comedy image.
A pregnant teen idol just did not fit the brand.
No. And this is a classic example of the crushing hypocrisy surrounding child stars. They're hired to be adults who can handle professional demands, Yet at the same time, they're expected to maintain this utterly innocent, childlike personal life that never deviates from the script.
Her real life, with all its complexities, just collided violently with the business model.
It did. And the sources provide a really powerful insight into her emotional state at that time through a quote from her co-star, Conrad Bain. He revealed that Plato confessed to him that she deliberately got pregnant.
Deliberately.
Yes. And when he asked her about it, she was enthusiastic, saying that once she had the baby, she would never be alone again.
That one quote is just devastating. It suggests a profound and perhaps desperate motivation for the pregnancy, a quest for unconditional connection, and a solution to overwhelming isolation.
A solution she sought through motherhood rather than through healthy adult relationships or, professional support. It reveals an immense vulnerability right beneath the star facade.
It makes sense that someone who felt they grew up in a plastic bubble, isolated and performing, would seek a human connection that was absolute and permanent. The emotional need was clearly far greater than any career calculus.
Despite the dismissal, she wasn't entirely cut off immediately. She made a single-episode appearance on The Love Boat in 1984.
Right, and she continued to appear recurringly on Diff'rent Strokes until its cancellation in 1986.
And one of those final appearances actually stands out for its gravity and critical reception.
Which one was that?
It was the January 17th, 1986 episode. It saw her character, Kimberly, dealing with bulimia. CBC News described it as a series high point, which suggests that even as she was battling her own personal demons, she was capable of delivering these powerful dramatic performances that really resonated with the audience.
So once the sitcom ended in 1986, the infamous transition period began. And this is where the difficulties common to child stars, being typecast, struggling for serious roles, hit her particularly hard.
It became incredibly difficult for her to be taken seriously as an adult actress. The perception was just that she was Kimberly Drummond, and any role outside that archetype was a struggle.
And to try and break that image, she made a very deliberate and public attempt to shed that 80s teen idol persona.
She did. She underwent breast implants and modeled for a June 1989 Playboy pictorial.
That was a significant move, a very clear signal that she was done with the wholesome image. But did it work? Did it help establish her as a serious adult actress?
Unfortunately, no. While it generated a lot of attention, that attention didn't translate into the serious, high-caliber roles she was looking for. Instead, the role she began taking showed a clear shift toward lower-budget, independent films and B-movies.
We see her moving into titles like Bikini Beach Race in 1992 and Lethal Cowboy in 1995.
Exactly. The professional degradation in the quality of her projects was rapid and very stark.
And it wasn't just acting she was attempting. The sources mention a very brief attempt at another performing art.
She tried to launch a music career in 1990. A producer named Howie Rice sponsored her, and she recorded 6 tracks. However, those recordings, they never saw the light of day. They were ultimately shelved.
So this entire period is just characterized by these frantic attempts to restart or redefine her career, all of which met with failure or, at best, diminishing returns.
And while her professional life was deteriorating, her personal world was simultaneously crashing down. She had married a guitarist, Lanny Lambert, in 1984, but they separated in January of 1988.
What's critical is the timing of this separation. The sources detail that the separation occurred the very same week that her mother, Florine, died of scleroderma.
That is an almost unbearable emotional load to carry. I mean, the immediate, simultaneous loss of her primary life manager and the end of her marriage.
And that emotional devastation was immediately followed by a catastrophic financial betrayal, which really cemented her financial ruin. This is perhaps the most infuriating systemic failure in her whole narrative.
It's absolutely critical. She signed over power of attorney to an accountant. This is a common practice for celebrities, especially those who lack financial literacy, which Plato herself admitted she lacked, those life skills.
Right.
This accountant then disappeared with the majority of her money.
And the scale of the theft is just shocking, especially for a young person trying to regain control of her life.
She was left with less than $150,000. And while that might sound like a lot of money, when you consider she was in her mid-20s and attempting to restart a career with a child, it's a crippling setback.
And in today's money.
The value of $150,000 in 1988 is roughly equivalent to over $410,000 today. And the sources highlight her claim that this accountant had stolen more than $11 million from other clients as well.
That sounds like a sophisticated criminal operation. Was the accountant ever apprehended?
According to the sources, no. Despite an exhaustive search and the scale of the theft, the accountant was never found or prosecuted. This effectively vaporized the wealth she had accumulated during her entire period of stardom.
And if you trace this back to the plastic bubble where she didn't learn reality and life skills, you see how profoundly vulnerable she was to this specific type of exploitation. She simply lacked the tools to protect her own assets.
The compounding losses just continued with the finalization of her divorce from Lambert in March 1990. And in that divorce, she lost primary custody of her son, Tyler, retaining only visitation rights.
So by 1990, she had lost her career peak, her mother, her marriage, her fortune, and primary custody of her son. The foundation of her life had just completely collapsed.
And yet, amidst all this chaos, she actually managed to secure a role that, in a very strange twist of fate, made her one of the pioneering figures in a brand new medium, video games.
You're talking about the game Night Trap in 1992.
Yes. She became one of the first mainstream celebrities to star in a video game that used full motion video, or FMV. The sources clarify that the footage itself was captured earlier, back in 1987, when the game was initially conceived for a different platform.
What was the atmosphere surrounding that shoot? Did she see this as a potential comeback?
Well, one of the game designers, Rob Fulop, he noted that she was very eager to work on the project. But the materials also indicate that while she accepted the job, she made very little effort to hide that she considered it a professional step down from her previous career heights.
But she still did the work.
She was dedicated to the work, showcasing a continued desire to perform and earn an income, regardless of the platform.
The legacy of Night Trap goes far beyond just being a curiosity, though. It became a modern success for its era.
It's historically significant. Not only was it a pioneering title for integrating live actors into video games, but it became central to a massive political controversy in the early 1990s.
Right. Alongside other titles, Night Trap was cited in congressional hearings over concerns about violence and sexuality in video games.
And the result of that public and political outrage was a major, lasting change in the industry.
Precisely. That storm of controversy ultimately led to the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB, which is still the primary system for rating video game content today.
So, in the middle of her professional decline, Dana Plato unexpectedly played a role in the creation of a major regulatory body that governs video games globally. It's an incredibly strange footnote in her story.
As the decade wore on and her financial situation remained desperate, the career choices shifted further toward roles explicitly designed to exploit her name and her past fame.
We see a clear and really desperate shift toward erotic roles. She appeared nude in several films, including Prime Suspect in 1989 and Compelling Evidence in 1995. These were roles taken out of financial necessity and a desire for visibility.
And then perhaps the most cynical act of exploitation came toward the end of her life.
That was the 1998 softcore drama she starred in. The sources highlight that the film's title was explicitly changed after filming was complete.
To what?
To Diff'rent Strokes, the story of Jack and Jill.
Oh, wow.
It was a blatant and undeniable effort by the producers to mislead the public, to exploit the recognizable connection to her past work, and just cash in on her notoriety. It truly illustrates the relentless pressure on her to monetize her past identity, even when it was detrimental to her dignity.
Her last filmed appearances included Desperation Boulevard in 1998, where she essentially played a version of herself, and then the posthumously released film Pacino is Missing in 2002.
And this whole downward trajectory was deeply intertwined with the underlying, often hidden, struggle of addiction, which leads us to the details of her public downfall.
This is a devastating segment because it forces us to acknowledge that the struggles with addiction were not a new development in her adulthood.
No. The sources indicate that during her Diff'rent Strokes years, when she was supposedly living that wholesome life, she was already struggling with drug and alcohol problems.
She was extremely candid about this later, publicly admitting to using alcohol, cannabis, and cocaine. But the truly chilling detail is how early this all started.
It is heartbreakingly difficult to reconcile with her public image. She admitted that she suffered an overdose of diazepam when she was just 14 years old.
A drug overdose at 14 years old, while she was a massively popular, top-billed star on a major network sitcom. That fact alone paints a powerful, painful picture of the extreme pressures, the lack of adult supervision, or maybe the availability of substances in her environment right at the peak of her stardom.
The plastic bubble did not keep out the danger, it only isolated her with it.
And that underlying chronic struggle eventually escalated and became a major public spectacle during the 1991 robbery incident.
Yes.
Let's detail that event because it speaks volumes about her state of mind and her desperation at the time.
On February 28, 1991, in Las Vegas, Plato walked into a video store. She demanded money from the cash register, and she was using a pellet gun. The sheer absurdity of a globally recognizable star committing such a low-stakes robbery really captured the media's imagination.
And the quote from the clerk is infamous because it instantly crystallized the surreal nature of her downfall.
The clerk was so flabbergasted by the sight of Dana Plato robbing him that he called 911 and famously reported, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Diff'rent Strokes."
That confusion from the clerk just highlights how dramatically her private reality had diverged from her public persona.
And the robbery itself, it underscores the desperation we were just discussing regarding her financial situation.
Exactly. The amount she managed to steal was paltry.
Only $164. To put that in perspective, that amount, adjusted for inflation, is about $387 in today's money. It was a minuscule reward for an action that carried years of prison time.
A high-stakes crime for a desperately small return. And what happened after the robbery? Did she try to flee?
No, which is perhaps the most bizarre detail. She returned to the scene of the crime about 15 minutes later and was immediately arrested.
She just came back.
She came back, and the subsequent legal proceedings gained international attention. The sources note that the entertainer Wayne Newton posted her $13,000 bail.
She ultimately received 5 years probation for the crime. But the cycle of addiction and legal consequence had become firmly established, and she quickly violated that probation.
She was arrested again in January 1992, less than a year later, this time for forging a prescription for diazepam, the same type of drug that caused her overdose when she was 14.
And this violation of her probation terms meant jail time.
It did. She had to serve 30 days in jail.
30 days in jail for a former teen idol. That is a brutal reality check.
It is. Following her time in jail, she did enter a drug rehabilitation program, attempting yet another recovery. But the combination of chronic addiction, a destroyed career, and the financial ruin made any stable recovery incredibly challenging.
And at this point, she was living a transient existence, so far removed from the security and glamour of her childhood.
The sources paint a poignant picture of her life in the late 1990s. At the time of her death, she was engaged to her manager, Robert Menchaca, who was 6 years younger than her. They were living together in a Winnebago motorhome in Navarre, Florida.
A far cry from the mansions of the San Fernando Valley.
Very far.
It's astonishing that despite her fame, she had fallen into such poverty and unemployment.
She returned to Las Vegas at one point and really struggled to find work. And this is where we get one of those striking, humanizing images. Her working as a cashier at a dry cleaning store. The sources indicate that customers were impressed by her friendly lack of airs. This suggests that even when reduced to minimum wage work, she maintained a certain genuine humility and approachability, interacting with the public without the pretense of celebrity.
That sets the stage for the final tragic moments of her life, which were centered around a devastating media appearance. We're now looking at the final interview and her death in May 1999.
The timeline here is just chillingly compressed.
Okay.
On May 7th, 1999, Dana Plato appeared on The Howard Stern Show. And this was, for all intents and purposes, a public plea and a career intervention attempt.
She was there to discuss her financial problems, her legal history, and to claim that she had finally overcome her struggles.
She presented a narrative of recovery, claiming she had been a sober addict and alcoholic for over 10 years.
Yeah.
However, she also mentioned that at that specific time, she was taking prescribed painkillers, hydroquinone, because she had recently undergone wisdom tooth extraction.
That's a critical detail that often gets overlooked.
It is, but the environment of the show quickly turned toxic.
It devolved into a confrontational spectacle.
It did. Callers phoned in specifically to insult her and aggressively question her claims of sobriety. This level of public scrutiny and cruelty was directed at a deeply vulnerable person. The confrontation provoked Dana's anger. And in defiance, she publicly offered to take a drug test right there on the air to prove her sobriety to the audience.
And the sources describe a very strange dynamic between her and the host, Howard Stern.
Stern did defend her at certain points, but the sources also note that he referred to himself as an enabler, and, in an act of dark humor or provocation, he sarcastically offered Plato drugs during the broadcast. The pressure, the disbelief, the public shaming, it was all happening live under the guise of entertainment less than 24 hours before she died.
Did the drug test ever happen?
She allowed a hair sample to be cut during the show for testing, but Stern later claimed that she asked for the hair sample back after the interview was over. Regardless of the outcome of the test, the environment was one of intense, immediate, and aggressive pressure directed entirely at her history of addiction.
And the very next day, May 8th, 1999, the situation became fatal.
On Mother's Day weekend, she and her fiancé, Robert Menchaca, were traveling back to California. They stopped at Menchaca's mother's home in Moore, Oklahoma, for a Mother's Day visit. During the visit, Plato said she felt unwell.
And she took a cocktail of medication.
Yes. She took several doses of the painkiller hydrocodone-acetaminophen, known by the brand name Lortab, combined with the muscle relaxant carisoprodol known as Soma. She then went to lie down with Menchaca inside their Winnebago RV, which was parked on the property.
We really need to stress how dangerous this specific combination of drugs is.
It cannot be overstated. The materials explicitly warn that the combination of carisoprodol, which is a powerful central nervous system depressant, and hydrocodone, which is an opioid painkiller, carries a major drug interaction risk.
So when taken together,
they drastically increase the risk of profound sedation, severe respiratory distress, coma, and ultimately death. This combination, sometimes referred to informally as the Holy Trinity when it's misused, is extremely common in accidental and intentional overdoses because the combined depressant effects can cause the user to simply stop breathing in their sleep.
and tragically, she died in her sleep that night.
Menchaca and the family discovered she had passed away in the RV at the age of 34. Initially, based on the circumstances and the known fatal drug interaction, her death was generally assumed to be an accidental overdose.
However, the official ruling brought this assumption into question.
It did. The medical examiner eventually ruled her death a suicide. This determination was based on her long and documented history of substance abuse and, critically, a history of past suicidal gestures. This ruling changed the narrative from a tragic accident to a final intentional act.
And this ruling sparked an immediate and painful dispute among those closest to her.
Absolutely. Friends and associates, including her co-star Todd Bridges, publicly disagreed with the suicide ruling. Bridges argued that Plato had taken an ambiguous amount of the drug, specifically intending to fall asleep, perhaps hoping to escape the intense pain and scrutiny, rather than intending a fatal outcome.
So that nuance between desperate self-medication and intentional suicide remains this heartbreaking uncertainty surrounding her final moments.
It does. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. While that concluded the narrative of her life, the aftermath and her legacy had far-reaching national implications.
Her death immediately made her the tragic poster child for the national debate surrounding troubled child stars.
And this was amplified immensely by the highly publicized personal difficulties faced by her Diff'rent Strokes co-stars, Todd Bridges and Gary Coleman. Her death cemented the idea in the public consciousness that there was a curse attached to the show.
The media quickly capitalized on this narrative, turning her life and death into television drama.
We saw two prominent examples in quick succession. In 2000, Fox broadcast After Diff'rent Strokes, When the Laughter Stopped, which heavily focused on her turbulent post-show life and her death. Then in 2006, NBC aired Behind the Camera, the unauthorized story of Diff'rent Strokes.
And that film deliberately reinforced the curse narrative.
It did, culminating with the scene showing Bridges and Coleman standing near Plato's grave.
The focus on this tragic narrative only deepens the pain when we look at the devastating secondary tragedy that occurred years later, the death of her son.
This is truly the most heartbreaking detail in the source material. It demonstrates the generational ripple effect of trauma and loss. On May 6, 2010, just 2 days before the 11th anniversary of Dana Plato's death, her son, Tyler Edward Lambert, died by suicide from a gunshot wound to the head. He was only 25 years old.
And the sources provide context that suggests a direct link between his struggles and his mother's loss.
They do. Tyler struggled immensely to cope with his mother's death. The sources indicate that Mother's Days, the holiday on which his mother died, were always particularly difficult for him. It creates a devastating echo of the isolation and vulnerability that defined Dana's own final years.
Dana had sought motherhood because she felt she would never be alone again. Yet her tragic absence clearly left her son in a profound and ultimately fatal state of isolation.
It's a terrible cycle.
Despite the sensationalism and the public downfall, the materials do contain a powerful counterpoint in the enduring friendship she maintained with Todd Bridges.
Bridges' public tribute speaks volumes about the genuine human bond that survived decades of turbulence and scrutiny. On what would have been Plato's 55th birthday, November 7, 2019, he posted a moving public message on Twitter.
He wrote, "You are the one person I could always talk to. You were one of my best friends. I will never forget you and love you forever. Happy birthday, Dana Plato, R.I.P. You are free, my friend."
That sentiment, the idea of freedom and enduring loyalty, it stands in sharp contrast to the way the media so often treated her. It offers a necessary measure of compassion that was largely absent from the narrative of her later life. It reminds us that behind the headlines was a human being who was deeply loved.
So if we take a step back and synthesize the entire record, from the high-flying child star to the cashier and the dry cleaners, what is the core lesson about the systemic failures that contributed to her fate?
Well, the record outlines a clear and devastating pattern, and it's rooted in her early life. She was a child raised in what she called a plastic bubble, isolated and lacking critical life skills. That vulnerability made her an easy target for severe financial exploitation. I mean, millions were stolen from her, effectively wiping out her future. And her long-term struggle with addiction, which began at age 14, was just exacerbated by this financial and personal chaos. Her story is a profound record of how intense public scrutiny and the lack of systemic protection for child actors can lead to total collapse once the primary role ends. She just lacked the toolkit to survive outside the spotlight.
And we have to acknowledge that in her final hours, the public wasn't a passive audience. They were active participants in the immense pressure she was under.
Indeed. And that leads to the final reflection we must leave with you, the listener, drawn directly from the documented facts. Consider the role the public and the media played in Dana Plato's final hours. Specifically, the televised confrontation, the aggressive questioning of her sobriety, and the anger she was subjected to during that radio show appearance, all taking place just one day before her death.
What does that indicate about the accountability or lack thereof in media interactions with vulnerable public figures who are actively struggling?
It raises a very serious question about where the line is drawn between content consumption and compassionate human engagement.
A necessary and profound reflection on a difficult story.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.